In June of 2024, I went to Puerto Rico as part of my birth month celebrations. Yes, I said birth month. Yeah. Don't do that. I met some amazing grassroots organizers who are resisting the continued colonization of Puerto Rico. I wrote an article for the Earth First Journal, so this is kind of like a video essay, video article.
My name is Jojo, and I like to use my stories, pictures, and videos from traveling around the world to talk about important political issues so that travelers like me can be a bit more conscious about the places we go, the people we meet, and the cultures we encounter.
Puerto Rico, or as the Tainos called it, Borikén, is an island in the Caribbean. But as Bad Bunny said in his acceptance speech,
Puerto Rico, créeme cuando te digo que somos mucho más grandes que 100 por 35.
Puerto Rico is the history of a community that is as resilient as the Malanga and the Yucca rooted in its soil. It's a coqui frog singing in the middle of the night. It's a two-step and a congo drum. Empanadas and alcapulrrias still bubbling hot out the fryer. Boricuas rocking hoop earrings and Papís in pressed Guayaberas. Ever since Bad Bunny's Benito Bowl performance, immaculate, as well as him winning the Grammy for Album of the Year, a lot of people have had a lot to say about Puerto Rico. But let me tell you one more story. Just one more, please. It's about why Bad Bunny hopped his happy ass on those wobbly electric poles during his performance. It's about grassroots activists and indigenous healers using solar energy and ancestral knowledge to resist the continued colonization and the deliberate neglect of Puerto Rico by U.S. politicians, both Democrats and Republicans alike. This is the story of a solar revolution happening and building in Puerto Rico. Okay, I know that's dramatic, but it's about solar panels, medicinal gardens, petroglyphs, and El Depa, a nonprofit food hub that has increased access to local foods and fostered transitions from extractive to regenerative practices. But before we can talk about the current situation, let's dive into a bit of history. So in my mind, Puerto Rico has dual citizenship. First, as the United States' most important colony, and second, the oldest colony in the Americas. Starting in 1535, Borikén was forced into Spanish occupation, but what later became Puerto Rico fell into the greedy hands of the U.S. Empire in 1898. Now with a population of over 3 million people, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. It acts as an amusement park, a bank vault, a pharmacy, and a brothel for the U.S. elites. That's how they treat most Caribbean islands, but particularly Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's the reason why Puerto Ricans are constantly being priced out of gentrified neighborhoods. And I want to make this clear that both Democrats and Republicans are responsible for the austerity measures, resource mismanagement, and systemic neglect of Puerto Ricans. Politicians have opted to treat the island like a business, privatizing public goods and stifling economic development. Similar to Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico is quite literally taxation without representation. Up until 1948, the governor of Puerto Rico was appointed by the U.S., not elected. And yet to this day, Puerto Ricans still do not have voting rights in Congress. They only have a resident commissioner. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, but their vote in the presidential elections only counts if it's casted on the mainland. Yet, no surprise, if Puerto Ricans wanted to join the U.S. military, they can do so right in San Juan. The lack of Puerto Rican representation and political power in Congress is by design. It's to maintain the island's status of a giant plantation where wealth and resources can just be withdrawn and extracted at any point in time. It's no wonder that in 1954, 4 Puerto Ricans, Lolita Lebron, Rafael Cansa Miranda, Andres Figueroa Porero, and Irvin Flores Rodriguez fired 30 rounds from semi-automatic pistols onto the legislative floor of the U.S. Capitol, where representatives were discussing an immigration bill. The group was a part of a broader movement by the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party to demand the island's independence. They kind of acted out on their own. Like, people knew they was going to do it, but they was like, no, don't do it. And they was like, I'm going to do it anyways. Shout out to Lolita, because she was like, bitch, I'm going to get my freedom. In 2011, President Obama made the first official visit to the island by a sitting U.S. president. But by 2016, he had appointed an economic committee that damaged the island's economy and increased the cost of living. The Financial Oversight and Management Board managed Puerto Rico's budget through austerity measures, making the government pay back its debts instead of providing a salary and benefits to government employees and teachers on the island. In 2017, the twin hurricanes of Irma and Maria devastated the northeastern islands of U.S. Virgin Islands, particularly St. Thomas and Puerto Rico. But storms don't play politics. It's the federal government and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. They are the ones that are responsible for the thousands of deaths and the electrical power outage that lasted for over a year. Like, I need y'all to understand this, okay? So I volunteered in hurricane relief on the island of St. Thomas and U.S. Virgin Islands. And at one point, I took a quick trip to Puerto Rico, and I can confirm with my own eyes, like, going there, it felt like the hurricane had just happened. And I was there over a year later. But there were still power outages, there was still debris, there was still buildings that were dilapidated and collapsing. There was no aid, no resources whatsoever. And how did Trump respond? Well, you remember that video where he threw paper towel at Puerto Ricans at a FEMA distribution center? Yeah. In 2018, a FEMA report found that its warehouse in Puerto Rico was nearly empty when Hurricane Maria hit. No cots, no tarps, very little food and water. You see, when Hurricane Irma hit, they had redirected all of those supplies from Puerto Rico to other islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands. But then when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico even harder, nothing was left for Puerto Ricans. That's the resource mismanagement I'm talking about. So the records show that at the time, FEMA hired a supply company that was just 2 months old. 2 months old. Imagine being in business for 2 months and you get a big government contract for thousands and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. That company didn't supply a single fucking tarp. There was another company that FEMA hired whose only previous contract was for $4,000 worth of kitchen utensils for a prison. That company didn't provide a single tarp either. To make matters worse, because of the Jones Act, the surrounding Caribbean islands and countries in the Americas were not able to send aid to Puerto Rico without first shipping it to mainland US and then shipping it to Puerto Rico, lengthening the entire fucking process. In 2019, Puerto Rico's governor, Ricardo Rosello, was ousted for mocking victims of Hurricane Maria. It was a series of racist and vulgar and homophobic text messages that included not only marginalized groups, but other local government officials. His replacement, Governor Wanda Vazquez-Garcet, was also ousted for corruption charges related to her 2020 campaign. Allegedly, she offered to appoint a financial regulator of a banker's choosing in exchange for campaign donations. Oh, and she's a Trump supporter. So that checks. In 2011, under the Biden administration, Puerto Rico's public utility company, PREPA, privatized to become Luma Energy. Privatization means that it's now a for-profit business. It is not a public utility. Running a public utility like a business has exacerbated problems such as daily power outages, destructive voltage fluctuations, and fires that are sparked by electrical malfunctions. Luma also started proposing additional rate hikes that would increase electricity for Puerto Ricans who they already pay some of the highest electricity bills out of anyone in the United States, anyone in the mainland, any other territory of the U.S. Luma also wants to control the $9 billion in taxpayer funds that FEMA allocated specifically to the Puerto Rican government in order to solve the island's energy crisis. On September 18, 2022, almost exactly 5 years after Hurricane Maria, Fiona came in and just... She made landfall in Puerto Rico, hitting the region of Guayama, which is a historically Black region in the southern part of the island, although there was a lot of destruction and many, many deaths. This time, something was different. Puerto Ricans had already begun building community systems to rely on each other and not the federal government. But today, the inequality deepens as remote workers, crypto bros, and nomad capitalists like Jake Paul moved to Puerto Rico to evade taxes, while at the same time demeaning and degrading the island's culture, history, and its people. In 2025, there was a major blackout across Puerto Rico, with only 12% of the island being restored, but the impact wasn't felt equally. I read an article about a journalist who was vacationing at a Puerto Rican resort at the time of the blackout. She had gotten text messages from friends and family members asking her if she was okay. And she was kind of confused, like, what happened? They're like, the blackout, girl. There's a major blackout in Puerto Rico. You see, she was on the resort. She was in the tourist areas. She hadn't even noticed a flicker of the lights, like nothing. Her Wi-Fi barely even turned off. This is the kind of inequality that we're talking about. They find energy and resources for the tourists and the resorts. Meanwhile, locals, your abuela and your abuelo, is just left out for fucking dead? It proves that the US government and even some local Puerto Rican officials treat Puerto Rico like a Disneyland for the rich while completely disregarding the needs of the locals and the indigenous populations. Come on. So when Bad Bunny climbed his happy ass on top of them wobbly electric poles, hip thrusting and moving his body and singing with such passion, it wasn't just a stunt. It wasn't just a prop. It was a political message, a critique of Puerto Rico's crumbling infrastructure, right in the heart of the empire. For many Puerto Ricans, the solution is to adopt renewable energy systems, mainly solar power generators and solar microgrids. This is seen as a threat to the profits and investments of the for-profit electricity company, Luma Energy. As recently as December 2025, Luma was actively suppressing solar innovation by requesting limitations on rooftop solar projects, requesting adjustments to the utility rate, which would increase the cost of electricity by up to 40%. And they also wanted to remove net metering. Net metering is a policy that fairly credits solar panel owners for sharing the power and the electricity that they generate back to the grid. So for example, on my parents' house, they have solar panels on the roof, and in the day when they generate an excess of electricity from the sun, they put that energy into the grid. The electricity company gives them a credit. Okay, you've generated $20 extra of energy today. So at night, when there is no sun and the solar panels are not useful, they pull energy from the grid and they use that $20 credit to pay for the energy that they're pulling directly from the electricity grid. So in June of 2024, I found myself on this colorful, beautiful road in the Criolla neighborhoods of Guayaberas. There sits a humble building with a yard full of vines and fruit trees and vegetable plants, yet radical transformations are happening inside. This is El Depa, El Departamento de la Comida. It's a food hub, a zine library, a place to get juicy, sticky, sweet mangoes. In the previous articles, I talk about the difference between AC and DC, and I just want to explain it, give it like a quick 101. DC is direct current electricity. That means that the energy goes directly to the appliance. When we're talking about solar panels, the energy from the sun, the heat from the sun, heats up the solar panels. The solar panels generate electricity, and that electricity goes directly to an appliance. Let's say a refrigerator, for an example. So this refrigerator is not plugged into the wall. It's not plugged into a battery. It's plugged into solar panels, and it gets energy directly, DC, direct current. AC is when, if we have the same refrigerator, it's plugged into a battery or into an electrical grid where the current is alternating. It's a little bit deep. If you want to know more, read my first article about LEF farms in Virginia. So El Depa's building runs on a mix of electricity from the unreliable grid that's managed by Luma Energy.
This is pretty much like an explanation of how we work. We have here an AC system, which is connected to the grid.
Then there's alternative current solar panels where energy is stored into lithium car batteries.
And so this was our system where we like made these connections with the deep cycle batteries. But that's not enough batteries to hold most of the equipment that we needed.
They also have direct current solar microgrids that takes energy directly from the sun into things like light bulbs, refrigerators, freezers, fans, or a charging station where you can kind of do all of those things. And lastly, they have biofuel. Biofuel is derived from the fumes that are created from composting waste. So you can just take your regular, like vegetable scraps, lawn clippings, fruits, and anything. Throw it in a composting bucket. If it's sealed, it creates methane gas. That methane is then extracted and stored the same way that most natural gas is stored. This diversification of energy sources is a growing trend in Puerto Rico. Tara Rodriguez Besosa was born and raised mostly on the coastal areas of Santurce, Puerto Rico, not far from San Juan. As an architect, she has supported the design of El Depa, increasing access to local food economies and spotlighting the value of farmers with economic transitions from extractive operations to regenerative practices. Tara is a part of a web of consumers, cooks, restaurants, environmental organizations, policymakers, farmers, community gardeners, artists, and elders that together are decolonizing Borikén through food sovereignty and agroforestry. See, El Depa began as a multi-farmer online CSA. What does CSA stand for again? Community Supported Agriculture. That's what it is. Okay, so they started off as an online CSA. They then added a store and they started hosting workshops and events, distributing foods to restaurants. Eventually, they launched a commercial kitchen with their own food products, and they became Puerto Rico's only restaurant where all of the ingredients came from local agroecological farms. Like many across Puerto Rico, El Depa was devastated after the twin hurricanes of Irma and Maria in 2017. Tara and her team reopened in 2019 as a nonprofit collective. They focused their programming to create replicable models of shared resources, not just for food, but for energy infrastructure as well. Anyone in the community can propose a workshop in El Depa's building. Anything from calabash carvings to knitting and sewing to plant medicine. It's a place to learn and to literally grow. So in 2022, El Depa teamed up with Alexis and Debbie at Living Energy Farms in Virginia, which I wrote an article about them. If you want to learn more about these AC/DC solar panels and solar microgrids, you should read that article. It's on my Substack. Anyways, Tara and some peoples from Puerto Rico, as well as other Caribbean islands, went to Virginia to learn how to install and maintain DC solar microgrids. And when I visited in 2024, Tara gave me a tour of El Depa's building, the garden, and the surrounding area. Tara explained that the building originally came with these giant fluorescent bulbs, bright enough to make you feel like if you're in a prison, but they're not great on energy consumption.
Require us to have a really big solar backup system if we were to continue to use these fluorescent big bulbs, which is what the building came with. And so we work in for us, like, it's actually difficult to replace and transition out of existing AC electricity, right? Because these bulbs might be expensive to power on solar, but it's what we have.
So to save energy, especially during the frequent power outages, El Depa alternates between these fluorescent bulbs and the DC solar-powered LED light bulb. Unlike LEF in Virginia, El Depa currently does not have the capacity to be completely off the grid. But that's okay. Tara says the solution is more about diversifying energy sources rather than relying solely on one or the other. For example, El Depa is planning to install a DC solar water pump. But because they typically don't water plants during the hottest part of the day, when the sun is brightest, they have an AC pump as a backup for early mornings and evening watering.
Right now, that's specifically the discussion because my coworker that's helping me with this pump, he's like, but we can't water during the sun. We want to water specifically because of our watering practices. We want to practice when there's no sun to water. And so we're going back and forth. We have an AC pump right here, we have a DC pump, and we're just gonna make the decision based on like what we really need. Yeah.
There's also a DC charging station that is connected to the LED lights, but it can also be used to charge up small appliances. So batteries for a power tool, for example, if they're going to use a weed whacker that has a battery, they can put that battery into the charging station. And then when it's finished charging, use the weed whacker day, night, whenever. It can also be used to charge phones, and you can hook up things like a fan directly into the charging station. It uses a USB, so it's not like you can plug up your hair dryer into the charging station, but it works for most small appliances.
In here is where we have just the inside. It's pretty, it looks more complicated than it is, but this is what we learn how to set up. And so like all of these, this is just like things that you buy, no? All of these little electric things, you get to know them. Like this thing that looks really complicated, it's just to hold up to 8 wires at a time. They're all like store-bought, easy stuff. And so here I can just recognize like, okay, I have my negatives and positives, and I have my ground, and I see that, oh, they're connected. Iron battery, the lithium ion battery might be this big. So that's why this box is so bulky. But as to the recommendation of Alexis and Debbie, these last much longer. Yeah. So it's a bulkier set, but this is something that is easy for us to make. We made it just like by folding metal and like adding these things. So this is how we train over there at Living Energy, and then we're using it here. And like it has something that's really big like that, which really is just a light. It's a relay.
In the kitchen, they continue to use gas appliances, swapping out biofuel as much as they can. But they also have a Roxy oven, which was built by Terab and designed by Living Energy Farms. The Roxy oven is powered by DC solar panels. So literally, like, the oven is inside, but like there's a little thing that goes outside and it goes straight to a solar panel, and the solar panel is collecting energy from the sun. Like, so cool.
These are connected right now. So if I wanted to turn this on high, it has just high or low. Here's the temperature, ¿verdad? I just turned it on.
Wow.
And then you can feel it. That's just from panels to this equipment.
Wow.
And so it's these Alexis and Debbie, they designed and they, ¿verdad? They
built the oven itself.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
wow.
I actually helped to build one of these. This
nice.
So this is part of what we learned, and also with this, right? You have to learn how to use it, which is, yo creo que the most important thing around all of this conversation is how are we adjusting our practices?
Yeah.
Beyond the technology. Beyond finding the correct technology, how do we adjust our practices?
It's been a learning experience to revamp traditional Puerto Rican recipes, which usually involve cooking over an open fire, and turning them into meals that can be done in a closed oven that only has 2 settings. See, that's kind of the shortcoming with DC. With alternating current, you can kind of like have a spectrum of settings, right? 1 through 5, maybe. Low, medium, high. But with DC current, it's kind of like low or really fucking high. So with this Roxy oven, it's like you either do low, slow baking or high, fast heat like an air fryer. One appliance that they haven't been able to move over to DC solar is their commercial dehydrator.
We do a lot of dehydrated fruits because bananas, when mango is in season, jackfruit. And the best way for us to preserve and conserve is we do like the jam. So this is a mamey chutney. This is a relish of cucumber, but this is when cucumber starts to go like yellow, which is really when it's mature. Cucumber is actually in its mature state when it's yellow, not green. But we're used to eating it green because of commercial distribution systems. But this is with yellow cucumber. when it's like about, this is a store that when they don't sell the cucumbers, they put them in a box, they donate it in exchange for, we give them back the equivalent in jam, in relish.
Okay.
So we make relish out of that. This is just dehydrated star fruit. These are tomato sauces. And here we have Italian basil dehydrated. We have fresh organic. This is the best. This is ground pulverized turmeric. And this is gold. This for me is like anybody who buys in the supermarket turmeric, very different. Turmeric and ginger.
There are other cultural adaptations as well.
We work in different ways, and this is something that is also indigenous to the Caribbean, is kind of like how you work. It's not, you don't work an 8 to 4, 9 to 5 schedule.
Yeah.
It is very much based on doing some things very early in the morning, doing some things in the evening, and then doing some things como que punctually in between, and taking breaks. I mean, and that's why Puerto Ricans might be known as being lazy, and I'm sure that we're not the only ones that are called lazy, pero it comes from that, and it's also como que when you live here and you don't work at noon. Como que you don't do that. And so it's just a different culture.
So while Tara was in Virginia learning from Living Energy Farms and building these solar microgrids, kind of has to be translated into Puerto Rico's climate, because in Virginia, they're mostly focused on keeping warm in the winter and cool in the summertime. But in Puerto Rico, you have to be cool all year round. Like, you're always focused on bringing down the temperatures. So Aldapa's building itself has large A-frame roofs with wide overhangs that keep the sun from hitting the walls of the building directly, and thus keeping the building from heating up. Aldapa has also built outdoor shelters which cover you from the sun but allow airflow so that the area itself keeps cool. One of the most amazing designs is this small shed that uses a solar power window air conditioning unit to create a walk-in freezer. And it keeps fruits and vegetables well below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Aldapa understands that their work doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's connected to the broader community of Caguas and the island as a whole. And Aldapa is just one of the hundreds of solar projects that are popping out all throughout Puerto Rico. There's a growing movement towards renewable energy driven by community needs rather than profit incentives. The government has a goal of being 100% powered by renewable energy by 2050, I think it is. But the people are not waiting for the federal government to take action. They're taking the initiative in their own communities with their own families and their own neighbors. One of the interesting things is when Tara explains that the same companies who are responsible for the failing electrical grid are now the companies pushing solar energy. While renewable energies might seem progressive, it doesn't matter if these same companies keep their colonizer, racist-ass approaches to development. Tara said that there are tons of solar panel projects planned on agricultural lands. So instead of using the island's copious amounts of roof space, which many organizations have pushed for, big energy companies are opting for using nutrient-rich farmland, a practice that Tara says exacerbates food insecurity.
And so that's a little bit of the battle right now, is like, in the name of renewable energy, that still doesn't mean that communities own it or control it.
So between the townships of Guayama and Salinas, there's a former sugarcane plantation that also has a 52-year-old oil-fired power plant, and then a 22-year-old coal-fired power plant. And it's currently owned by the Virginia-based company Applied Energy Services Corporation, or AES. While the plants are set to be retired in a few years, residents say that the damage to the delicate biodiversity and the pollution to the drinking water and air in neighboring communities will have lasting effects. When the coal plant retires in 2027, AES has plans to fill the 135 acres of former sugarcane plantation with utility-scale solar panels.
You start to see the relationship between this sugar industry and everything that is about, and then you start to see that right there they added this power plant. And the power plant, you go there and it's crazy. Like the amount of noise, the amount of fumes, it's all, it's the typical scenario that we see in the States. The cancer rates, anxiety, like there's a whole bunch of stuff. And just that community that is there is now they're being surrounded by literally plantations of solar panels.
They're creating a solar farm on a sugar plantation. Ruth Santiago, a local Puerto Rican who became a lawyer in order to defend her community. She is now a world-renowned environmental health advocate and activist based in the Salinas Township. Ruth and other community activists are pushing for the government of Puerto Rico to invest in rooftop solar rather than solar plantations like the one AES wants to build. Ruth is a part of a community-based organization called Coqui Solar, which installs rooftop solar panels for low-income and vulnerable residents of the Salinas neighborhood. Each kit costs about $7,000, which Ruth has been able to offset using grants and donations from Puerto Rican nonprofits and foundations. While the solar kits are not always enough to power the entire house kit, they do provide basic necessities during a power outage. The lights, refrigerators, and water pumps can still run, and people have access to food and water, even when there is a major blackout. In an interview for Inside Climate News, Ruth says, "We need to really go beyond resilience. We need to go toward energy security and sovereignty." And that's what we're trying to do. At least create and do these pilot projects, these community-based examples of what the transformation would look like. If you don't do it now, then when? Ruth, Tara, and hundreds of other community organizers are committed to empowering Puerto Ricans to not just access renewable energy, but have agency and sovereignty over how it's installed and managed. Meanwhile, FEMA and Luma Energy are determined to block Puerto Ricans from having any form of energy sovereignty. In October of 2025, the U.S. District Court of Puerto Rico ruled that FEMA violated the National Environmental Policy Act, also called NEPA, or NEPA, by failing to consider renewable energy resources. So after the hurricanes, after all of this destruction, FEMA was like, okay. We're just going to work with Luma and rebuild all of these failing power plants. The court is basically like, why didn't you consider renewable energy? And FEMA is like, well, that's not where the money resides. So FEMA is now forced to prepare an environmental impact report. Activists are also calling for FEMA to distribute the recovery funds directly to individual families rather than looping in Luma Energy as like a middleman. Nah, just give me my money. Run them checks, FEMA. Get them straight to the Puerto Rican families who need it. So here's some good news. In December of 2025, Solar United Neighbors and their community partners won a major victory against Luma Energy's attempt to end net metering. This means that the policy that fairly compensates solar panel owners for sharing the power they generate with the electrical grid is protected, at least for now. It's a major victory for energy activists in Puerto Rico, but it's just the beginning of a much larger fight. Instead of leaning on capitalist for-profit businesses, instead of waiting for the government to implement guidelines and regulations, communities in Puerto Rico are taking initiative, literally taking it into their own hands, climbing up on electrical poles just like Bad Bunny did, climbing up onto rooftops and installing their own solar panels, leaning on each other for support, developing their own innovations through trial and error and a collective responsibility. It reminds me of this phrase from a musician that's based in New Orleans called Dana Lynn Knuckles. She is always on Instagram saying, "Survival is a shared burden." I love that. Survival was never meant to be an individual obligation. It was never meant to stay within the two-parent household and the nuclear family. While capitalism and colonization aims to isolate us in our own struggles, make us feel lonely, like we are the only ones and there's no one we can count on, Puerto Rico reminds us that liberation is a collective effort. Please, of course, like, comment, subscribe, follow, do all the things, but most importantly, share this video, share it with a friend, put it on your group chat, repost it. In order for other people to see this, in order for my channel to grow, I really, really, really am relying on you to share this video. Thank you. Come again.
I don't know if you see that.
Oh, wow.
See that?
Oh my gosh.
Over here.
Wow. It just like appeared.
It's